It's our great pleasure to welcome to our 2022 Online Trend Summit CEO and co-founder of Nicks and Kicks, Julia Kessler. Today, Julia is going to talk to us about the Nicks and Kicks story, how to stand out as a challenger brand, how to balance commercial, social, cultural, and ESG in a business model, but also how to balance risk and uncertainty with growth and success. And of course, much more. We'll certainly be talking about the amazing products within the portfolio as well. Thanks for joining us today, Julia. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our virtual stage.
Thank you, Charles. Really excited to be here.
Great, thank you, Rob. Just before we get on into the discussion, a note to participants: if you're joining today's summit as a Trend Hub subscriber, you can discover more about the topics in this discussion in the 23-24 food and drink trend predictions, and of course our cuisines and ingredient predictions as well, all on Trend Hub. Thank you, Julia. Welcome to the summit. Some of our audience may not have heard of Nicks and Kicks. I can't imagine why that would be, but some of them might not have done. But for those that haven't, who and what is Nicks and Kicks?
So Nicks and Kicks is a healthy, refreshing soft drink with a zing from cayenne. We're basically bridging the gap between unhealthy Coke and plain water.
Yeah.
And what we've done is we've been probably trading since 2017. And what's really great about our brand is that you can find us from the 5-star Mandarin Oriental in their mini bars and also front of store in a meal deal and Co-op.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I actually seen them in a hotel minibar recently, actually, as well. So you're right. I mean, we'll get on to channels and so on later on. Yeah, it's you're in many different spaces. So that's super exciting, and I'm sure a key part of what you're going to talk about. Can I ask you, before Nicks and Kicks, what did you do? What's your background, prior to establishing this business in 2017?
Yeah, so I grew up in Germany and came to the UK in my early 20s, and I always worked in supply chain operations as a demand planner and operations manager, mostly for tech businesses, actually. So from mobile phones to software to payment devices. That was my background and bread and butter before I entered the food and drinks world.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit about how that background, what the transferable learnings are a little bit later on. But I'm really keen to explore what was your kind of founding inspiration, that spark that made you start Nicks and Kicks and begin this journey. What was that?
Yes, I think for my business partner Kerstin and I, we're both origin from Germany. We both grew up in a country where it's quite acceptable to go out after work and not drink alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we went out in the UK, we always felt like you sort of had to drink an alcoholic beverage, and if you don't, the options at the time were always very limited.
Yeah.
And just because you don't want to drink alcohol doesn't mean you want to drink something which is full of sugar or bland and not very exciting. And then in conjunction with that, we also, because we both work for big corporates, she worked for Credit Suisse, HSBC, and you could always see that our sort of fellow partners and employers, whenever you get to the afternoon, you had that sort of afternoon slump where you want something which picks you up.
Yeah.
And usually the healthier ones at the time, they then grab the smoothie, but then they went through that sugar spike.
Yeah.
And would get really hyper, and then after a while they would crash down again. And we want to create something which isn't that.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't find it. So that is where actually Nicks in our name is coming from. So we want from a get-go create something which isn't full of sugar, isn't full of artificial and bad stuff. So Nicks in German means nothing.
Okay.
But then if you strip out all the bad stuff, for the UK palate, like it's tasting really bland.
Yeah.
Because the average UK consumer, they grow up with Ribena and other, fairly sweet drinks.
Yeah.
So that mouthfeel needs to come from somewhere, and that is when we discovered that cayenne is actually a really great ingredient because it really brings that flavor depth to the proposition, and at the same time it's incredibly healthy for you. So that's what we decided to do.
And cayenne, when you say cayenne, cayenne pepper, basically, is that what? Yeah,
Cayenne pepper. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's also, as you say, it's incredibly healthy, but it gives you um, it's there's a sensation that comes with that as well as a flavor, isn't there? There's a kind of an
exactly.
organoleptic experience that comes with that as an ingredient as well.
Exactly. For us, it's all about the organometallic experience mostly because we want to sort of replicate that ever so slight afterburn you get when you drink a nice glass of wine.
Yeah,
And the cayenne in our drink, that is what it does. So you feel that little tickle at the back of your throat and makes it quite memorable, and it feels like you have a proper drink.
yeah. I mean, it's obviously been a journey. I think it's for any business owner or founder, it's a continually evolving journey. Can you give us a flavor of some of the the highs and the lows, the peaks and the troughs along that journey to get you to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, we had loads of both sides. I think for me the first high I had was definitely when we because initially we made it in our own kitchen and from scratch, and then we actually decided to move into a production site and seeing it coming up of the assembly line for the first time. For me, that is pretty exciting. That's obviously tapping into my operational background and was really, really cool. And then for me personally, I think the first time I got my very, very first customer called the Salon in Brixton,
Yeah,
and I got the order and I went home, and my own kitchen was actually my warehouse at the time.
yeah,
So my husband was very delighted at the time because it had cardboard everywhere. And I went and I grabbed my first 3 cases and I went onto the bus and I hand delivered it. And that is just such a special moment when you get your first sale
yeah,
and you see customers really buying into your proposition. So I think on the highs, there are many, but it's actually the small ones which really make it really memorable for me. Or when our very first, the largest retailer in the UK said, "Yes, we're gonna back you, and we're gonna believe we're believing in proposition." I mean, that feels really great. Um, there's so many, and I think the other one is also like our first hire because like
yes,
convincing
yeah,
someone. Actually, we didn't have to convince that person. That person came to us and said, like, I think it's really cool what you're doing. I want to work for you. It's really cool. Um, and then lows, I mean, gosh, the list is long. I mean, especially in the last 3 and 4 years. I mean, Brexit did not help. A pandemic did not help. Cost price increases left, right, and center do not help. And then the ever-changing rules and regulations in the
of
UK, they
course,
also do not really help. So,
yeah,
we're very resilient. I think every entrepreneur is, comes with the job. You're incredibly resilient, but I think in the last sort of 12 months, we all feel a bit like, I wish the problems would sort of slow down a bit. That'd
yeah.
be nice.
Exactly. They do feel like they come one after another. But I guess part of being an entrepreneur is how you adapt and change and yeah, evolve with that. I can definitely empathize with the high of seeing, when you see a product and come down a production line for the first time, when it goes from that kitchen sample to that scalable product that can be made in tens of thousands. I think the speed and the kind of automation around it, it's an amazing thing, isn't it, when you see it for the first time. Well, I mean, and that I guess brings us on to the next thing I wanted to ask you about. Really, clearly, you're a founder, you're an entrepreneur, a businesswoman. So I get, commercial success is clearly part of why you're in it. But in reading about the brand and talking to you before today, I really wanted to explore with you what's the why behind, I guess, the deeper meaning behind the brand. Why is it that you do what you do? What's the brand there to do, and what's the problem that you're trying to fix, really?
Yeah, so I think for us, like there are few like personal wise of what motivates me, but then also from a product point of view. And I think when we experimented initially on our kitchen table, we were experimenting with all sorts of different types of sugars and ingredients. And actually, my business partner and I, we got problems with our teeth within 3 months, and we're like, gosh, like
Wow.
we need to find a solution which doesn't do that, right? So we talked to dentists at the time, and they really tried to come up with something which doesn't give you problems, because once we decided on like, okay, let's create a soft drinks brand, we knew we're gonna drink it for
Yeah.
a very long time ourselves,
Yes.
and we didn't both
Yeah.
want to become fat because of that or have teeth problems, right?
Yeah.
So all of our ingredients, we didn't cut any corners, and I think that is sometimes where brands out there, that's what they do. So they might say 0 calories, but then use, sucralose or aspartame, which isn't good. And for us, it was always about like also making it accessible. So we
Yeah.
didn't want to be super outrageously premium, so that nobody can afford it.
Yeah.
And I think for us is like, flavor and taste is everything. And we're not, I wouldn't go as far as we are the Marmite of the drinks, but cayenne in a drink is not for everyone, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But then the people who buy into it and who like it, they really like it.
Yeah.
And for us, it's like giving that authenticity. So when we designed the product initially, we made sure that our whole end-to-end supply chain is vegan. We're not cutting any corners there. It's HFSS compliant, sugar tax exempt. So from the get-go, we just designed it in
Yeah.
a way that it ticks all the boxes, because it's so important for customers and retailers. But then also, I mean, what I personally find really exciting about building the brand is just building a really amazing team around us, and having really great people who support us on that journey, and who are really really great individuals, and giving them the opportunities to grow with a company like ours, and doing it in an ethical way as possible. And I think that is what really sets us apart. We went from like being fully office based to now fully remote, and that brings a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
But it's just having that conversation, and people don't always stay stick around forever, which is obviously normal when you're young.
Yeah.
But like, so far, what makes me incredibly proud is when I see that we hire people out of uni, and now they become like senior managers in big corporations, and that just makes me really happy.
How would you describe what your values are? How would you bring those to life?
Yeah, so I think for us is authenticity is really important, and being open and transparent, like for us as an organization, is bringing the zing to everything we do, which is
Yeah.
basically you know having a positive mindset,
Yeah.
and having fun. That's so important, because working for a challenger brand can be incredibly exhausting and time consuming, but
Absolutely.
then the reward is that we also like to enjoy being together. And then I think the other one is just testing and learning, like don't be afraid to try something, and you might fail,
Yeah.
right? But then if you fail, like, learn from it.
Yeah. 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 Um, I think one of the other things that I think is really exciting about your particular business model is how you balance a lot of different priorities. And I suppose do you believe that it's possible to balance, commerciality, but also social, cultural, and ESG kind of impact in a business model? And if that is the case, how do you go about doing it? What are the kind of foundational principles for that?
Yeah, so I think for us, from the get-go, we always said we want to build a as sustainable as possible, right? Like,
Yeah.
obviously there are limitations on how much you can do, but we always try and find ways to make it sustainable and ethical. And we're very proud. We have a really high percentage of female investors,
Yeah.
a higher percentage than the industry. We hire great talent, of which many are women.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from, the leadership from the top, from me and my business partner, first and foremost. And we don't do things, as I mentioned before, as a tick box
Yeah.
exercise. We do it from the heart. So the way you balance it. So as an example, we produce in the UK as well as in mainland Europe, and we partner with a transport company which has a solution where you can get the product moved from A to B with a train. And
Yeah.
that is great because A, it's cheaper than using lorries. And secondly, it saves 70% of carbon emission compared to transporting goods by lorry.
Yeah.
But it takes more time. So you have to plan in advance a little bit better.
Yeah.
But, just in time in our sort of industry doesn't work anyway. So there are definitely ways where just because they are running a more ethical business doesn't mean that it comes at a really high expense.
Yeah.
And that is definitely possible. So when I think about, for example, in our cans, we don't use BPA. So most cans we have a BPA lining inside the can. We made sure that ours are BPA free. And it costs a tiny bit more, but not massively. But then on the flip side, there are certain countries in the world which expect you to have that, and otherwise you can't sell. So actually it becomes a commercial advantage when you think about all of those things in advance.
I guess a big part of the procurement and the product composition is that obviously the ingredients, the things that actually go into the drink itself. How does that approach, I suppose, influence things like sourcing and ingredient procurement and those types of things?
It's for us, it's always about finding great partners. So we have a really strong supplier base. With some of our suppliers we've been working with for 7 years now. And it's just having the conversation up front and understanding, their ethos, what's important to them.
Yeah.
And do they have a green agenda or not? How do they source? And reality is we wouldn't partner with somebody who hasn't got that on their radar. And that is how you create strong partnerships and collaborations.
Yeah. Do you think that things like I guess environmental and eco labeling and those types of things are they an important part of communicating to consumers what the kind of impact is that they're having? I mean, one of the things that we strongly believe, certainly going into the future, is that yes, of course, there's cost of living crisis that's happening at the moment, but the longer term projection would be that consumers are going to want to be more accountable for their impact. Do you think those types of tools are useful as we go into the future, and is that something that you've looked at?
I mean, this year we got quite a few great things. One is that we got an A rating for our carbon emission, and the second one was that we got B Corp.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to have organizations like that. It's a really rigorous process to get the B Corp approval. So it's good to have bodies like that who standardize the process, and there's a vetting tool. My concern is a little bit that if you don't standardize it well, it can complicate it, and then it can confuse consumers, and that could send the wrong message. So for example, there's obviously also like a plastic tax coming into play very soon in the UK. And reality is plastic plays a role, and actually it helps that the product is more protected, and therefore you have less wastage. And so does it really offset completely what you're trying to achieve? And I think there are a lot of things which coming into play. The idea in principle sounds good, but in practice, does it really do the job? And I'm not a believer for all of those changes which the government is putting into place. have the right idea in mind, but actually it causes a lot of challenge, especially when you're a smaller challenger brand,
Yeah.
because when you're not Coca-Cola, where you can be like, okay, so I make 10,000 different SKUs, no problem, one for Scotland, one for England, one for Wales.
Yeah.
Challenger brands don't normally have that
Yeah.
capacity. So I think as long as it's well thought through, standardized, and you don't have one rule in Wales, one rule in England, and another in Northern Ireland, and then Scotland might say, I do my own thing,
Yeah.
then yeah, it can work, but I think it needs to be standardized.
Standardized and I guess joined up as well, in as much as
Yeah.
very easy to, I think, to have a policy for that feels like it's addressing one issue, but the ramifications of that are often much greater, and there's often a desire to just fix things quickly with a standalone policy rather than thinking about the holistic system, which I think is what you're alluding to as well. The obviously the and forgive me, I hope I'm terming this correctly, the adult soft beverage space, which I'm seeing it as more of an adult soft beverage. So do correct me if I'm wrong. And there are obviously various different subcategories within that. It's already quite a crowded space. How do you stand out, and how do you create awareness as a challenger brand?
Yeah, so I think for us, what's really important is to stay true to what we are and what we're not.
Yeah.
The amount of times, especially in the first couple of years, the amount of times we heard from people, oh, can you make an elderflower drink? Or can you maybe make a drink without cayenne?
Yeah.
Then you just become, dilute your proposition and you just become a Me Too product. And I
Yeah.
think staying differentiated, staying true to what you are and what you're not, that is how you manage to stand out from the crowd. And
Yeah.
then also really understand your target consumer. So we're a very data-driven company, given my background. So we really analyze what's working, what's not working, where is it working,
Yeah.
and understanding those pockets of consumers and where they are, and then target them specifically, as opposed to say like, oh yeah, we're a product for everyone and anyone. Because I think that is really difficult to then get cut through at
Yeah.
scale.
And how would you define those things? I mean, I'm imagining there's a handful of things that you would say, actually, these are the points within which we differentiate. How would you describe those?
For us, it's definitely the taste. I mean, we know that when we sell, our repeat rate is 30% higher than the rest of the category. So where we quite low right now is the penetration. So we need to work on getting the penetration up, which obviously comes with, better marketing or a marketing
Yeah.
investment. But we know that when people buy it, when people try it for the first time, they tend to buy it again and again.
Yeah.
And that is what keeps us going. So, rate of sale, penetration, and repeat rate are definitely our key KPIs.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, we'll talk about flavor in a little while, but it is really distinctive, and it does make you, when you're doing that scan of the of the fixture, or a food to go chiller, or in a transport hub or something like that. When you're casting your eye, if you've tried it before, you'll go straight for it, because it's super distinctive. It really is. You touched on a couple of moments ago about your kind of background, and I wanted to ask you what you felt the transferable learnings were from, coming from, a logistical supply chain in the tech world to what you're doing now. What are those transferable learnings?
Yes, I think the key learnings are definitely data and insights. We do that quite well. We're quite reasonably good at forecasting. I mean, nobody could have foreseen the last 12 months, but otherwise, we're reasonably good at that. And I think it's just not being afraid to make difficult choices, whether it is like delisting a proposition or
Yeah.
creating a new proposition,
Yeah.
and having that leap of faith to say like, we're doing it. It might not work, but then we tried it and we didn't miss the boat because we constantly fought for not trying it. Like, as an example would be, we sort of monitored the market for the last 3 years in terms of like flavors, what's growing, what's declining, as well as sub segments within the soft drinks category. And one of the things which we identified is that, there's certain flavor profiles which are massively in growth, and then there's certain sub-functional categories like wellness and functionality which are massively in growth. So we then showed a couple of concepts to some of the big retailers over the summer. They said, yeah, it looks really interesting, would definitely back that. So then from signing off the concept to actually producing it took 10 weeks. So we're that fast. So that's I guess the other bit is like once we go, we go,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so from ideation to actually getting it delivered was 10 weeks, which is
Wow.
really amazing.
Yeah, that's incredibly fast.
It's super fast, yeah. My team is always a little bit apprehensive every time I'm like, here's a new idea, let's go.
Yeah.
But then I'm obviously equally incredibly proud when it happens. But yeah, it's those moments when we're a bit like, oh, but we're already stretched. I'm like, yeah, I know, let's just go for it. But like that's MPD, which we now launched, and it might fail,
Yeah.
but we tried.
Yeah.
But I would be very surprised if it does fail. But it's just giving that space to learn and grow and test something new, and
Yeah.
might work out and might not work out.
Those new flavors sound super exciting. Are you able to share with us what those flavors are?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just new flavors, it's also a new sort of subcategory we're tapping into. We're bridging the gap between functional, because normally functional is really good for you, but maybe it doesn't always taste that great.
Yeah.
And just carbonates with great flavors. So we're calling them vitamin vitality.
Uh-huh.
And we're really pushing the boundaries when it comes to calories. So they're even lower than our current range. So they have 28 calories per can,
Uh-huh.
which is super low, which is
Yeah.
the same as half an apple.
Yeah.
And then what's really great about the proposition is we're adding a vegan vitamin D mix. So vitamin D is normally derived from sheep's wool, so it's normally not vegan, but we found a vegan source.
Wow.
And we're also adding B6 and B12 because these are the two vitamins which, if you have a plant-based diet, you're missing that from your diet.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the functionality aspect. But then the two flavors we created is one is tropical,
Uh-huh.
and the second one is orange and passion fruit.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, um, passion fruit, just as a back note, I can imagine that works really, really well with orange. Just the aromatic that comes from passion fruit. It's incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely, and obviously both of them have our signature thing in
Yes.
them as well.
Yeah. So they all include that little bit of cayenne, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, talking there about risk in new products, how do you find that you balance risk and uncertainty? And there's a lot of that around at the moment with that that appetite and that desire for growth and kind of progress and success. How do you kind of tread that line?
Yeah, so it's not always easy, but I think as we were all, I think at the beginning of pandemic, I was obsessed by the news and I watched them every day. And earlier this year with the war in the Ukraine, I found myself doing the same, and I was on like risk analysis calls nearly every day, and and obviously it's incredibly sad what's happening there, and I think also we need to be thankful because yes, it all impacts us to an extent, but we don't have to live through the same as people in Ukraine. But when I looked at all the different external factors and what was talked about, and I get told all the time like ranging new products in the current environment must be really difficult, is actually not what we found.
Yeah.
So we still managed to grow the business. We still managed to get new listings. We will have our best year ever on record. We already broke, our target from last year 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah.
we are already heading in that direction. And I think sometimes you can get too distracted with external factors
Yeah.
as opposed to really just focusing on what's going well for yourself.
Yeah.
And And then if you spot that things are impacting you the same way, then obviously think about how you compensate, overcome those. But I think don't get too distracted. And I think that is where sometimes leaders are getting too distracted, they're doing too much, trying to de-risk the current situation when actually maybe it doesn't actually impact you as much.
Yeah, and I guess there's a bit about also being obviously respectful for what's happening in the wider world, but also and relevant to where consumers are, but also balancing that with particularly when you've got a distinctive proposition, being single-minded about what you're there to do and the role that the brand plays in the broader food and drink landscape as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you touched on it a few moments ago. Obviously, continue to be in quite uncharted times. Yes, from a consumer point of view, you've got cost of living a crisis, and those costs are going up increasingly. But you've also got cost of production as well from a manufacturing perspective. It's all the same pressures, but just on a magnified scale. How do you think, as a brand, how do you maintain relevance in the kind of current climate that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, like look, that's probably the most challenging bit
Yeah.
for any food and drink brand, big or small. And the reality is, you gotta pass it on, and it's not a fun conversation, and it's incredibly hard. And I think sometimes the response you get from certain retailers is disproportionately harsher than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
But we re-engineered the product more than we could over the last couple of years, because obviously, it started with Brexit, and then it came with other sort of external circumstances. So we've done what we could from a product point of view. There isn't anything, without tampering with the taste, which we would never compromise on.
No.
So you have to just pass it on, and obviously the most common response you get from retailers is like, oh, if you pass it on and we pass it on, then it will be more expensive on shelf, and then consumers won't buy it anymore. Well, how do you know that? Like it because if everybody around you does the same,
Yeah.
then consumers they still want choice, and they still want. And I think you have to also just think of the occasion. Like, most of the consumers I know and the consumers we're tapping into, they might go out once or twice less in a week.
Yeah.
But then when treat themselves at home, they want to treat themselves to something a little bit more special.
Yeah.
So I think it's just I know a lot of brands who are scared to take action, and I think right now you can't be scared, because you have to manage your business in a commercial way.
Yeah, well, I guess the brand can be there, and you're talking about the occasion piece. The brand can be there to trade into, which might be a trade down from a different experience, I guess, can't it? As you say,
Exactly.
you consider the brand in an in-home context rather than out-of-home context. Yeah, it can work in that space as well. I have to ask you about if we think about the adult soft drink category, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in the category, and I suppose how are Nix and Kix doing their bit to fix that or address it or challenge it?
I think one of the biggest challenges is what I keep hearing is space. So there are a lot of players, not just in adult, generally in soft drinks, and with a lot new evolving subcategories where retailers don't really know where to put them. So, for example, in some retailers you find kombucha in the health and wellness section, and some other retailers you find that as part of the adult soft drinks market. Then you also have low and no, and retailers just generally, it's a challenge to think about like where do all those different categories sit.
Yeah.
And I think it just needs a complete rethink as to what categories should look like and the concept, because historically you had your carbonates and then your water, and in between you had like lemonades basically, and I think that is all shifting, and I think there's real opportunity for retailers to take a leap of faith and be like, okay, right, let's just, if we could start from scratch rather than making incremental changes here or there, what would we do differently?
Yeah.
And then also just thinking about how can they support challenger brands? And I'm not talking just about us, I think in general, there's an opportunity if you put them on shelf and support the brands to actually get it moving,
Yeah.
and not expect them to pay the same ticket size as some of the bigger brands have
Yeah.
available to them. Because when you think about what retailers did with the craft beer market, they've done a really fantastic job. It's fun to go into the
You're right.
areas and the aisles and discover brands. And I think there's an opportunity for most retailers to do the same when it comes to non-alcoholic beverages.
Okay. Yeah. Um, I want to come back to flavor, if I may, for a moment. I absolutely love the mango and ginger product. I can get it from um, a, a really great kind of farm shop near me called Darts Farm, and it's the flavor is so distinctive, but so often the competitive landscape in this particular area just don't deliver. There's an awful lot of promise, but often don't deliver in terms of flavors, and yours do. Well, I suppose first is, and I think you've kind of gone some way to answer this bit first, how and why, but also I wanted to know what was the best selling flavor as well.
First of all, thank you. And yeah, Dodds Farm is a really great customer of ours, and they supported us for many, many years. We're a really great venue. So I think for us, when you think about flavors and what's working in the category, our combination should not work.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
So mango, yes, mango and ginger, no. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it also proves that sometimes, what you think might work wouldn't necessarily deliver. And on the flip side, but people tell you that definitely won't work and actually can work. And for us, it's all about like finding finding things which pair really well. So it's always, we're always leading with fruit and then a spice element.
Yeah.
So you have a primary and a secondary, and we combine that. And blood orange turmeric, for example, again, that was one of the combinations
Yeah.
which people said won't ever work, right? Why would you want turmeric in a drink? And it actually works incredibly well and is in a really large retailer nationwide available. But yeah, I mean, for us, mango and ginger, so I'm glad to hear that because it is our bestseller. So great that you buy into it. But then we also thought about a bit more, how can we bring in a few more mainstream customers into the proposition and then help them trade up. So that's why in the last 2 years we created a raspberry rhubarb,
Yeah.
because they're proper traditional English heritage flavors, which
Yeah.
people really, really like and buy into. And then we got a watermelon and hibiscus as well.
Yeah.
And both of them, they also do really, really well. And they bring a bit more mainstream flavor consumers into the proposition. And then they're a bit more passionate to then maybe try another flavor.
Yeah. And I love that. Also, it feels like you're single-minded about what the Nix and Kicks flavor is, or the characteristics of that. Regardless, obviously, you can then apply different. So leading with fruit, and then there's then perhaps a slightly more challenging or spicy accompaniment to that, and then you've obviously got your cayenne back note as well, which I guess is the kind of continuity, the thing that links everything together.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do you see consumer appetite for flavor changing? Do you think? Because I think, if we look at other flavor propositions in that space, clearly citrus plays a really big part of that. Berry plays a really big part of that. You're kind of pushing boundaries in that space. Do you think the appetite for flavor and what people are looking for in flavor is changing?
I do think so. Yeah, I think more and more people are, because of the gin revolution. I mean, gin and tonics. I think that is really what started, the palate to change a bit more.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously the notes you get from gin, they're now picked up in soft drinks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So juniper and things like that. And I think people are just generally a bit more open-minded to try new things.
Yeah.
And also the realization that, if you go to a party or an event, historically you might get your carbonated apple juice, or like I said, like your ginger beer or your elderflower. These were generally the go-to flavor profiles. And I think now you want to provide something that is a little bit more differentiated
Yeah.
and can be discovered. And I think, some of our competitors that are doing also a really great job and like bring more different flavor depth to the profile. Um, and I think it's definitely changing also with the introduction of some categories like kombucha. Kombucha is a very differentiated flavor profile again, right? I think people are just a bit more open to wean off sugar and
Yeah.
try something with a bit more flavor.
And something, I guess, that delivers more of an experience as well. I think
Yeah,
there's, if you're particularly if you're substituting an alcoholic beverage as well, you want something that you can savor and enjoy, as opposed to something that's bland and doesn't have the associated experience that goes with it. So, your products, although they're a liquid, they have a real sensorial depth, and almost like a mouthfeel to them, as opposed to something that's not as defined from a flavor perspective. Last question: what does the future look like for you? What's next for Nicks and Kicks?
yeah. I mean, for what's next, we are in every single retailer but one, so I'm definitely aiming to to change that. And then it's just building out, just generally building out more of the distribution within our existing customer base. And really excited, we hired a new senior brand manager as well this year, and actually doing some proper marketing and getting the product into the hand of consumers, because for us it is about the flavors. We need to get millions of people to try it and then get them to buy it again and again. And that's really our biggest strategy. We are in, a lot of distribution points already, but we really need to get the penetration up, and that's the biggest job for us for the next year. And then come up with some more brand collaborations and ideas. That I'm really excited about our NPD, and I'm confident it will fly. So if it does, then we might add some more flavors to it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, there may well be people in the audience today who might be interested in talking to you about brand partnerships and collaborations. So I'm sure, if they are, then they'll be in touch. But on that note, Julia, a huge thank you from Team TFP and all of the 2022 Summit audience for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, your journey to this point, and we wish you well with the launch of your NPD and your foray into this the functional need state. We will be really excited to see that. So thank you very much for joining us. It's really good to have
Thank
you as
you.
part of the Summit lineup for this year. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.